without further ado, I do want to turn this over to Commissioner Dykes and welcome you here. I'm a little distracted because I've been spotlighted, and so I can't see everybody. I don't even know where the commissioner is right now, but I know she's here.
Amy. I'm here.
There you are.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much for doing this and coming, and let's get at it.
Super. Well, Amy, thank you so much for having me. And I'm just excited to see so many folks joining us today. And this is a conversation, we had the chance to get out and do a couple of events, celebrating some really important conservation wins earlier this summer, as well as Amy helping to celebrate and recognize some of the great work of some of our leading land trusts in the state. And conservation partners. And so, in some of those events where we were joined with the governor and the lieutenant governor to really recognize the power and impact that this community is having, it struck me it would be great to schedule, a conversation like this. We can keep it really informal, but just to have an opportunity to talk together about some of the key, opportunities that are coming up in deep supporting many of our different open space acquisition programs and other policies and programs that we're doing to protect special places around the state and working with all of you, as well as to talk about the opportunities that we have to work together on some of those overarching, policies that are not directly related to open space and conservation, but will certainly have an enormous impact on the ecosystems and the wildlife that we're seeking to protect and enhance through our commitments to open space. And I'm so speaking here specifically about policies like the Transportation Climate Initiative. It's not something that is in the direct wheelhouse for many of our land trusts and other conservation partners in terms of policy priorities potentially. I don't know that we've had the chance in the past to talk together about a policy like TCI, but the Transportation Climate Initiative is going to be, it's just critically important for our state in order to be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which we know are contributing to quickly accelerating impacts of climate change that are affecting our ecosystems around the state. And so I see a real connection there. And I was thinking it would be great to, in addition to talking about some of the current issues and opportunities with respect to our conservation programs, to also include in the agenda some discussion about some of these key policy areas where folks who care deeply about land conservation and climate change can get involved and have a major impact on helping us to reduce emissions and slow some of the catastrophic impacts of climate change in our state. So Amy, we can, I'd love to, maybe we can turn this into a back and forth, a conversation. I know we have the chat feature enabled, so if people have any questions or comments that they want to make in the chat, they may be able to do that as we're talking, but maybe you'd like to guide the conversation today, Amy, with some of the questions that I know you always have your finger on the pulse of what people are most interested in. And by the way, I should note that we are joined here by some of my all-star team. Mason Trumbull, I think Mason, you have your camera on, you can wave, is our Deputy Commissioner for Environmental Conservation at DEEP. And we have Rebecca French, who's the Director of our Office of Climate Change Planning. She's been leading the Governor's Council on Climate Change effort that I know many of you have participated in. And Nicole Lugley is the Director of our Office of Planning and Policy. She has been leading the charge on our land conservation programs, including OSWA, for many months now, and has just been tireless in helping to support that program. So they are here and going to be part of this conversation as well, and as well as Allison Clark. I'm not sure, Allison, if you have your camera turned on. on. Oh, there she is. Allison is just phenomenal. She is been filling my inbox with all kinds of, moving the process along as we are signing contracts and easements and getting grant dollars out the door. She is the person who is making all of that happen for the OSWA program. And so, we're so lucky to have Allison with us on our team and here with us today. So Amy, why don't I turn it over to you and you can volley the questions and we can get this conversation going.
That sounds great. We did collect a list of the questions that came in advance, as I had said when we started this, but I do encourage folks to put questions in the chat as we move along. And I'm going to really go in the order of the questions that we received, and it's actually perfect because you started out by talking about TCI, and there were a couple of questions asking what citizens can do to rejuvenate the TCI, the Transportation Climate Initiative, and asked why it didn't make any traction during this session. So why don't we start with that one and then move on.
That's great. Yeah, and I'm gonna I know most folks are very familiar with TCI, but just in case, maybe I can just give a really, really brief summary of what the TCI program is. TCI is short for the Transportation Climate Initiative Program. I think everyone's aware we have a goal or a requirement in state statute to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% across our economy by 2030. And the transportation system, if you think about all of those internal combustion engine vehicles, passenger vehicles, trucks, buses that are on the road today, that transportation system, burning fossil fuels, gasoline, diesel in those engines is contributing 38% of the greenhouse gas emissions in our state. That's the largest percentage of emissions coming from any one sector in the state. And so we can't meet that 2030 target unless we can reduce those transportation emissions by about a third by 2030. So we've got to, and here's some other not great news is that transportation sector emissions are increasing. Greenhouse gas emissions are increasing, even despite cars becoming more fuel efficient with the EPA standards that are in place. People are driving more, they're driving farther. And so we've seen those transportation emissions continuing to increase. So the other thing about transportation is that it's a major contributor to air quality problems in our state. 67% of the air pollution that's generated in Connecticut is coming from the combustion of fossil fuels in the vehicles that we drive. And much of that air pollution is concentrated in communities that live close to highways, that live close to industrial zones. Connecticut has some of the worst air quality and rates of asthma in the country as a result of all of that air pollution coming from largely from the transportation sector. And so this is a real issue for public health and for environmental justice and for equity. We saw during the pandemic, briefly when the stay home, stay safe order went into place last spring or a year and a half ago, a dip in transportation sector emissions when people were not on the road. It was very short-lived because people are actually still driving. We've resumed our normal driving habits more or less. But it was a brief glimpse of how closely connected driving, transportation and air quality is. And it showed us what would be possible if we could shift to clean transportation options. So the Transportation Climate Initiative is a program that we've been working on for a couple of years with many of our neighboring states. We really love to be able to implement solutions that are regional in nature. Sometimes people say to me, hey, Commissioner Dykes, Connecticut's such a small state, we can't solve climate change on our own. Why should we take action? What can our actions really accomplish? Well, when we, with the Transportation Climate Initiative program, we got commitments from our neighboring states, from Massachusetts, Rhode Island, from Washington, D.C., that if we would pass a bill to enable us to put this program in place, that those states agreed that they would pass the same kind of program in their states. It's almost like the NPR pledge drive or something. So right out of the gate, we're able to take our action in Connecticut, our climate leadership in Connecticut, and match that with the same equivalent commitment to reduce emissions from transportation in our neighboring states. So that's huge. How does the program work? It's basically requiring polluters to pay for their pollution. So it's not unlike a lot of the environmental regulations that we do at DEEP and that have been successful over the years. In this case, the polluters we're talking about are the companies that are selling gasoline and diesel fuel at the wholesale level to be resold in the state of Connecticut. We would basically be setting a cap on the amount of emissions that we would allow from the sale of those fuels. And that cap would gradually decline over a decade-long period. So it would send a strong signal to those industries to start cleaning up the fuel, offering cleaner fuels for sale so that they could help us meet that cap and reduce emissions. For example, a diesel wholesaler could blend biodiesel into their diesel fuel so that their fuel would be cleaner and emissions would come down. The other thing that the program would do is it would require those wholesalers to pay for their pollution. So essentially purchase an allowance from the state for every ton of carbon emissions associated with the fuel that they sell. Those dollars, right, from the purchase of the allowances would then come right back to the state of Connecticut for us to be able to invest for the first time at a really impactful scale in clean transportation solutions. We expect that this program will generate $1 billion in revenue for clean transportation here in Connecticut between 2022 and 2032. And this is the fun part. So then we'd be able to spend these dollars on things that help reduce emissions, improve public health, provide for more affordable transportation for everyone in the state of Connecticut. There's so many different ways to reduce transportation sector emissions. The obvious one is to help more people purchase electric vehicles, as well as to have more places to plug in those vehicles all around the state. Really exciting announcements coming out of EPA today and from many of our leading auto manufacturers that they're looking to make even stronger commitments to getting more EVs on the road. The TCI program would help us ensure that we have the chargers and we have really meaningful rebates available to make EVs affordable for everyone in Connecticut, regardless of your income level. We'd be able to support the conversion of transit buses and school buses over to electric. We could use these dollars to expand access to transit services in our state, which is especially helpful for rural communities where folks often lack access to transit. We could use these dollars to invest in bike trails, in pedestrian walkways, in transit-oriented development, things that can get people out of their cars, enjoy spending some time in nature as they're commuting and getting around in their communities. We know all of the benefits of that, for folks on this call. So there's so many different things we could do with these dollars. We know the technologies are available. These strategies are well known. We just haven't really invested in them. We haven't had really, really significant amounts of money available to drive these solutions at scale. And so that's what we'd be able to do if we have this program. We have to have this program in order to meet our 2030 targets. We know that if we don't take urgent action on addressing climate change and reducing emissions quickly, the catastrophic impacts that's having on our natural environment here in the state of Connecticut. So that's why we're so excited about the TCI program and wanted to bring this to everyone's attention. If it's not already on your radar or on your short list of things that you're talking to your elected leaders about or talking in your community about, I hope it can be, because this is one area where that support can translate to a major, major policy impact in the state. I'll say to the last point, this TCI program was on the agenda for the legislature this year. We were a bit disappointed to see that it did not get a vote before the end of the legislative session. But I'll say that we've been having continued conversations with many supporters of TCI, legislators, community groups, advocates, and it's been really encouraging to me to see that there's so many out there who really share our sense of the promise and the impact that this policy could have. And so I think to the extent that there may be opportunities for where the legislature may be coming back together, to consider moving this program forward, getting involved and in your community or with your local, with your elected officials, to let them know that this is something that matters to you, has a huge impact. I hear that all the time from legislators. It doesn't take that many calls for people to really pay attention and understand that this is something that matters to a lot of folks. So anyway, that's a long answer, Amy, but I, as you can see, real passionate about this one. It's a great opportunity, and I'm glad to take the question about it.
Yeah, well, there were several questions, and you hit a couple of others that I was going to follow up with. So great work there. And I think obviously if there's more information to be shared, they can look to the DEEP website as well as through CLCC as we have the opportunity to share that as well. Let me turn to the next set of questions, recognizing time here as well. So not surprisingly, we have several questions around land conservation, including the Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program. I think our land trusts they well understand the role that land conservation plays when it comes to mitigating the impacts of climate change, building resilience, as well as just overall keeping our communities healthy no matter where they're located. And so I'm going to turn to those questions now. And the first one was, what is the best way to receive funding for high priority land acquisition projects? And again, this was, I believe, in the context of the Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program.
Sure. Well, I just want to say that in the early part of this year, DEEP initiated a public comment opportunity for the competitive Open Space Grant Program. I know many of the folks on this call participated and gave us comments on that. We received comments from land trusts, from municipalities, from water companies, from environmental advocacy groups and private citizens. And we took these into account for the grant application revisions that were put in place for the OSWA grant program for 2021. I think, our focus is on accountability and timeliness, on public access, on environmental justice and equity, and on climate change adaptation and mitigation. These are all priorities, by the way, that were highlighted by the Governor's Council on Climate Change, which I also want to thank so many who have been participating in the GC3 as well. So, we posted all the comments on DEEP's website. I think that hopefully that process kind of signals for folks some of the priorities that we're focusing on, the ways that we're trying to, what we're looking for as we continue to manage the OSWA grant program. We want to be a partner with land trusts and with others and conservation advocates on helping to protect our public lands. Look, our public lands are providing for more and more benefits and helping us achieve more and more of our values, of our priorities, as time goes by. We're not only providing for open space for access for the public, we're protecting special places, wildlife habitat, connectivity on wildlife corridors, and all these other values. But in addition, our open, these places that we're preserving are also helping us fight climate change by supporting carbon sequestration, and habitat that becomes especially critical as wildlife or biodiversity are under stress. These kinds of values are continuing to be more and more important with every passing year. And so I think that I just highlight this public comment opportunity because, it was our way to communicate some of the priorities that we're looking for as we're considering new acquisition projects. And of course, continued funding and the support that so many of you are providing in letting people know how important conservation is has also enabled us to continue to have strong support from the legislature, from the Bond Commission for the funding that we need in order to make this program a success and to be well resourced year after year.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, I'm going to go to a question in the chat that really is a nice follow-up to exactly what you just said. And that is, in addition to TCI, how can DEEP help to make the connections between land conservation and climate more apparent to legislators and the public? How can we extend the learning and recommendations from the GC3 process related to working in natural lands? So really, digging deeper into the phase 1 report, knowing that some of those recommendations did come out through the legislative process, but we have another session coming up. How can we build upon that and really emphasize the value of working in natural lands to addressing climate change?
Well, we're, always looking for the opportunities to extend or to highlight those connections. I think that just in the transportation space, I think that there's been a real recognition of the importance of bike and pedestrian improvements and enhancements. I heard from folks who hopped on a bike and were beginning to do some bike commuting for the first time during the pandemic. For example, we certainly saw an explosion in people accessing trails and for recreational purposes. So I think a lot of people were trying out new ways of getting around, new forms of mobility, connecting to their communities in different ways. At the same time, the pandemic highlighted some of the, the consequences of our current transportation system in terms of climate and especially public health, right? As you think about the vulnerabilities of many folks who suffer from asthma and other respiratory illness to COVID. So we're really trying to, build on that experience and that lens to let people know that investing in transit-oriented development, investing in bike trails, pedestrian walkways, and helping people get out of their cars and find new ways to get around their communities, supporting more dense development in communities, more livable cities, walkable communities, it's doable. It's a wise place for us to invest dollars, and it's worth it. And so the TCI program will generate on average, about $100 million per year. Compared to what we're currently investing in these common sense strategies, this is a huge step change in the amount of revenue that we would have available. At the same time, Amy, for folks that are following what's going on in Washington, the Biden administration and working with Congress is advancing a bipartisan infrastructure framework that will send trillions of dollars into infrastructure in our economies. We know that this is going to include a historic level of investment in transit, in recreational trails. But I've just spent a lot of time with the bill, last night going through section by section. There's a lot of funding that's coming towards these types of solutions, but these programs, federal programs, are frequently competitive, or they require state and local matching funds. And so that means that having a scale, like a significant amount of revenue available through a program like TCI in our state will be critical for Connecticut to be able to essentially catch this wave of federal funding that can dramatically transform our communities in a way that makes them healthier, more livable, and more connected to the environment.
And that actually, thank you so much, Commissioner. And that actually, I think, addressed another comment and question that was put in the chat. But I would say to Mary, who posted it, if you want more follow-up, please post another question there, Mary. If you're looking for some more information. So I'm going to go back to the list of questions that we received, and turning again back to the Open Space Grant Program, which not surprisingly is a big deal for our land trusts. Here's one that says the OSWA grant applications due September 30th. When do you anticipate the awards will be announced, and when will the money be dispersed? That's the crystal ball question for you.
I know. Let me turn to Mason and Nicole. Let's see how you guys do in
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Commissioner. That's a great question. So I know that many of you are very anxious to see the grants announced and the money awarded. I just want to talk a little bit about as you know, we've been revamping the program, as the Commissioner mentioned, and we're really interested in making sure that grants are distributed and both to rural areas and to our cities, making sure that we're taking environmental justice and equity concerns as well as climate change considerations into our scoring. So we are revamping the scoring sheet. I know folks are eager to see that. we're going to have that out to you. We're shooting for the end of the month on that one. And then looking at, when we're making the announcements, we're going to take our time and make sure we do a thorough review of the grants. Our normal process for that is we put together an internal committee, internal to DEEP, and we score the grant applications per the scoring sheet, and then we'll make those announcements. So, certainly I don't want to make any promises on exactly when we're going to have those out, but certainly we know that you all are eager to see those, and we will do our due diligence to make sure we address those in a timely manner and make sure we get those grants announced quickly.
Thanks, Mason. I have another question here, and it is also related to the OSWA grant program because it concerns the Highlands Act, which, of course, as you know, provides a tremendous opportunity to match state and federal funding, and this would be in the Highlands region in Northwest Connecticut. And this question simply asks, how can Land Trust help DEEP move Highlands projects forward?
Well, that's a great, go ahead, Nicole.
Well, thank you. So the Highlands grant, well, thank you for that question, provides, critical federal matching funds. So that's really very holistically when you look at the state funding that we receive for open space, and then the opportunities for that we have with the Highlands funds. Thanks. So Mason, did you want to add to anything?
I think you nailed it. Thanks, Nicole. Appreciate it.
And I guess the question really is going to, is there a way for Land Trust to assist DEEP in moving that program, those projects forward? And so, I think the concern is always about the delay, the time lag in between, and wanting to make sure that those federal dollars are not lost. So, if it is something to continue to talk about in that, how can the Land Trusts do more to assist DEEP in terms of some of the due diligence and other elements of that program that need to be addressed in order to finalize those deals. So I thank the person who submitted that question for that offer, and we'll continue to work on that together to see if we can expedite those projects. Any other input, Nicole?
No, thank you. We appreciate it. I mean, Amy, as you know, many of you know, Tim Abbott is very instrumental with the Highlands grants. And that's a frequent conversation, trying to think about how we can leverage some of that assistance. So we do appreciate that offer, and it's something that we're continuing to discuss and keep an eye on. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, yes, I just want to make sure I wasn't muted. And here's another one, and it is somewhat related back to the conversation around energy. Well, it is related to it. It says, are the interests of conservation and the environment represented on the Citing Council?
Sorry, can you say that one again about the Citing Council?
Sure. The question was, are the interests of conservation and the environment represented on the Citing Council?
Well, that's a great question. And I know we've been looking at, obviously, so DEEP has a seat on the Citing Council. I know we've been looking at ensuring that there's that we have participation in the Citing Council, with appropriate expertise in terms of environmental background. I'll say that one area that we've been working on, because we're always thinking about how to minimize conflicts and ensure that, to the extent that DEEP has a role in projects or helping support the development of projects, that we're designing programs that ensure that projects are developed in ways that are compatible with our commitments to conservation, land use protection, and protecting wildlife and other important ecological values. And so I'm thinking here in terms of solar development. This is a place where we've had a lot of successes with the launch of various procurement programs for solar, both behind the meter and grid scale projects over the years. And there have been some conflicts that have emerged and lessons learned in terms of where we could adopt best practices to help to minimize conflicts, both in terms of natural lands and also core forests and prime agricultural soils and so on. We just recently initiated a process called Steps for Solar Development. And I don't know how many folks are familiar with that process. It's just really kicking off. And actually Nicole, who is one of the busiest people on the planet, has been, her team has been helping to spearhead that process, but it's really intended to try to bring everyone together, everyone who has a stake in ensuring that we have smart solar development in the state, to help give us input about how we can implement a solar policy for Connecticut that helps to minimize those conflicts and ensures that we can achieve our clean energy and GHG reduction goals in a way that's compatible with protecting important ecological values. And so, Nicole, do you want to give a quick plug maybe for what's been happening with the STEPS process and what's coming next? Because Amy, I think of that as like an issue that, there's a frequent conflicts that we might see coming to Citing Council, for example. And if we can head off those conflicts by getting solar developed in the right place in the first place, that's a win-win, all the way around. So I encourage folks to get involved in the process. Nicole, why don't you speak a little bit about what's happening?
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, absolutely. So the land trust, at the local level, the whole point is to be more proactive upfront when we're looking at siting. As the Commissioner said, these projects come before the Siting Council. They come to our agency for the regulatory process. So in June, we launched, it's a robust stakeholder engagement process, and we've called it STEPS. So it's for sustainable, transparent, efficient practices for solar development. So encouraging, across the board, various stakeholders. So we'd love the Land Trust to be more involved in that, for you to engage in that. So some of you I know have already been participating, which is fantastic. So in June, we launched, and in July we had, so we've had 2 scoping meetings so far. We had a scoping notice that kind of talked about the objectives and proposed 6 listening sessions to have through the fall. That we're working on those, and we've accepted comments. So we accepted public comments through the end of July, and then we're going to continue to have public comments opportunities for that through the listening sessions. So if you're interested, if you just type in CT Steps for Solar, all the previous meetings are recorded. The presentations that we had, if you want to catch up on that, that's all on the website. And then, I encourage you in terms of, as we continue kind of on this journey through the fall, we'll have these listening sessions and we can kind of address some of the issues the Commissioner's talking about. How do you be more proactive and influence at the stage when you are developing a solar project on that location? And then the other piece of it is, and then once the solar development is selected, once it's selected and you have a site, how do we make sure the best management practices that are used in the solar project are implemented? Because that's something else the department has had experience, and we've really evolved, for instance, with our construction stormwater general permit, some of the best management practices are included in that, that the department is influencing in the regulatory realm. So thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. And actually, there was a question that came in beforehand that relates to the siting of solar on properties that are being considered for grants under OSWA. And I'm going to read this question, and it says, so it's kind of it's certainly related, and it's kind of a good segue here, and I'm sure it's going to evoke some mixed reactions from those that are listening. And I think I encourage you all to put your reactions and comments, thoughts, etc., in the chat function, which we will continue to review after this meeting and provide some feedback as we're able to in cooperation with DEEP. So this question was, given that the elected legislators won't even consider discussing allowing towns to decide whether to implement a buyer's conveyance fee and their insufficient appropriation of funding to achieve Connecticut's conservation goals, would the CT DEEP consider modifying the conservation easement language on the Open Space and Watershed Acquisition Grant Program to allow for installation of small to moderate-sized solar projects on lands using the grants? Each project could be analyzed individually so that there is minimal environmental impact. So that's a big question for a short amount of time here, but it is interesting because it does get to some of the issues I think that you know, you've already talked about just briefly here through the steps, you know, just describing the steps process, but also it might be something to explore through the steps process. So Commissioner or Nicole, I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I think you hit it exactly. I was going to say this is one that we would love to hear from folks about in the steps process. You know, it's I know there may be some divided views on it, and certainly there's the legal question of, you know, how the conservation easements have been interpreted or crafted in the past. But it'd be, you know, the steps process is the perfect place. It's the ideal place where we want to hear from folks' creative solutions, or, you know, if this were to be allowed, what kinds of, you know, best practices would folks want to look at? We know that the solar industry has been, you know, offering up some models and examples of places where they're doing, you know, habitat protection or pollinator friendly plantings with solar panel. I mean, there's a lot of interesting examples and models that folks have been kind of coming up with to try to marry these two objectives of reducing emissions, promoting clean energy, and protecting ecosystem values. So, you know, regardless of how you feel about it, we'd love to hear from you, and the steps process is a perfect place to do that.
It's great. Thank you for that. And again, I encourage everybody to keep commenting, and even after this meeting, send us your thoughts on these things and we will continue to share. I'm going to turn to a question that I have often received from land trusts, particularly those in urban areas or near urban areas, and they are interested in expanding their holdings to properties that might require remediation. So this question is, what are the remediation grant opportunities for land trusts that discover their property contains toxic waste materials or are seeking to purchase or acquire land that might be contaminated and need remediation, and the land trust isn't in a position to fund that? Any comments on that?
Nicole, would you like, I mean, I think this is one that we want to, Nicole would be best positioned to talk to this one in terms of the existing programs. I think that this is something, I saw this question, I thought it's a really interesting one for us to follow up on more, because obviously we know a lot of those brownfields and contaminated sites are in our denser, you know, in our legacy industrial zones, in our urban environments. And there's a lot of enthusiasm about how to ensure that our conservation commitments, our open space protections are in areas that are, you know, close to our city centers and accessible to folks in our urban communities, and a lot of interest in community gardens and urban parks, and how we can use our open space programs to support land conservation in all parts of the state, and so we can promote our commitments to equity through this program. And so that naturally raises the question of, you know, in some of those key opportunities for conserving open space and urban environments, we run into some issues in terms of contamination and remediation needs. And so it's a really timely question. And if folks are running into that as a barrier, it's one that we really want to be hearing from you about what you're encountering. And so we can think about ways to, if our programs aren't already readily accessible or understood, that we can help to bridge that gap. But Nicole, do you want to speak briefly just to the DECD program and others that may be of interest to folks?
Right. Thank you, Commissioner. But as you're saying, absolutely, as we've revised the OSWA 2021 application this year, and with the greater emphasis on equity, and as we're looking at our urban areas, I imagine that this issue, which has come up previously as a question for the OSWA program, will be coming up more. So previously we appreciate having sites that don't need so much remediation. I mean, that's what we look towards. But as we have more of these sites available and people are interested in doing some cleanup, and if we have a contaminated site, we should really, we have that conversation, and we have expertise within DEEP that, from our remediation program, we consult with them about the site, we work with them. There may be funding opportunities through DECD, Department of Economic and Community Development. That's something we can explore. So as you say, as the commissioner said, this is something that maybe we identify now, it's a barrier that we're going to be coming up against, but it's something that we want to work to resolve, because that's what we want to encourage, that in our urban areas, that we do want to have the open space, and we don't, and at the same time, we're always talking about that we want to clean up brownfields. So that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole, and thanks, Commissioner, for that. And I'll also just add, as more of a comment than a question, that issue does arise for sites that are in rural communities as well, for sites that have been traditionally used as farms that land trusts are interested in purchasing, but the cost to remediate may be prohibitive. And if the landowner isn't willing to contribute, we often get the question, well, are there grant funds out there? Are there ways that we can find some funding to help us do that? So that is something to consider as well when we're looking at these programs together and finding ways to incentivize land trusts and their communities to invest in lands that might otherwise be out of reach. And then lastly, another topic around this as well is utilizing brownfields for solar development when groups are really looking for ways to avoid using open lands, working or forested lands for siting, and looking first to lands that are already compromised. That is another question that often comes up, and I know that we've heard that through the GC3 process, and even in the few meetings now through the steps, it's come up pretty forcefully. So I think that's a really good question. I thank the person who posed it, because it really touches on a lot of different areas that relate to land conservation. So thanks for that. Okay, let me get back to the list here. Let's see. Well, this will be, I think, a fun one to answer, and that is, does DEEP have program ideas to excite youth to preserve the environment and study species in their neighborhoods?
I'm going to turn to Mason for that one. Mason?
Hello. Well, yes, this is a fun one. I don't know if folks have heard of our.
Oh, you're muted, Mason.
You're muted, Mason.
Sorry about that. There we go. I'm not sure where I cut off there, but this is a fun question. I'm not sure if you have heard of our No Child Left Inside program, but if you haven't, definitely encourage you to check it out. It's actually ongoing right now, and it's a cool program that actually, Commissioner, I believe you are working on it with your family, correct? Some this year. And maybe I'll give you a chance to share a little bit about that later. But it's a cool program that allows you to kind of explore some of our really cool state parks, and each park has an associated hike with it. Some of the hikes are really short. Some of them are a little bit longer, kind of designed to have a variety of options for you to explore. So that's a really good one. And then we also have, we're running a bunch of, on the species side of things, I think one of the main things when it comes to outdoor education, especially for kids, has to be fun, right? You have to have the fun part first, and then kind of the learning part, you have to kind of sneak it in there. And that's where some of our fisheries programs are really exciting. And we've been doing learn to fish programs throughout the state, all over throughout the summer. And those have been extremely popular. I think we've sold out every single one, and that's been a really fun way for kids to learn about fishing and fish, and water ecosystems, watersheds, and so on, while also just having fun. So those are a couple fun ones. Commissioner, maybe you want to share some. I know you've been on some hikes recently. Maybe you want to share.
I've got 3 kids, so I love to get them out on the trail, and we've been doing the Sky's the Limit hiking challenge this year, which I know is a lot of folks are familiar with that. 20 hikes all across the state, and it's a great way to connect people to parks that they may not already be aware of. But Amy, Mason and I were down at Harkness yesterday having lunch, and we were just talking about with social media, right? There's so much opportunity for us to, like, people are really hungry, especially as we've seen this explosion in interest in getting outside during the pandemic. People are really hungry for information about how to, connect to places, how to get outside, where to go, even in their local communities. And so, we're always interested in thinking about ways to partner with the local land trust to make it easier for families to, find these places. There's just can be an overwhelming amount of information. You kind of tend to go back to the same places that and that can cause people to overlook, a lot of the incredible treasures that we have around the state. I think that one of the best ways to get youth interested in conservation is to get them outside and get them out in nature, and especially for children who do not live, in places where they have ready access. That's even more important. That's where the No Child Left Inside program has been, why it's been such a priority for DEEP for many years now. But with social media, with the ability for folks to kind of put together, we've seen an explosion of folks on Facebook and on Twitter kind of sharing their hidden gems or trails less traveled and helping people connect to places that they've never been before. That gives us a really easy way to partner together and get people to get outside and enjoy these spaces. We've seen a lot of folks getting interested in like the iNaturalist app and other types of things on their smartphones that can help them learn more about the species that they're seeing when they're hiking along, and then how to get the third message across, which is conservation, that these places are available and accessible not just by accident, but through the hard work and involvement of so many of our land trusts and local communities. And so I think that's the third message that, I'd love to brainstorm with folks about ways that we can, help people and help youth understand this, the impact that you can have through getting involved in the land trust, through getting involved in conservation. There's lots of ways that we can do that, and social media makes it even easier and less resource intensive for us to get that message out. People are hungry for it right now.
Yeah, agreed. I think all our land trusts are seeing that as well on their properties, probably like never before. So there is actually, just because you were touching on accessibility, there's a question here in the chat. A really good one from Dennis here. Accessibility options are generally expensive. Are there anticipated funding sources targeted to encourage additional accessible projects on OSWA projects? And anybody want to take that? I know we have the recreational trails program, and maybe we can talk more about that and other programs that DEEP might have.
Hey, Katie, I can jump in on this one. Yes. So I think the question is referencing, I guess I'm a little confused if it's referencing public access or accessibility related to contamination. I think it's the first. Is that how you'd read it, Amy? Yes,
the first. I would say, yeah, accessibility, right, for public access. And also even talking more specifically maybe about ADA and that type of making trails available for more people.
Yes, exactly. So as all of you know, public access is a huge component of what we're excited about as we look to making sure that people are able to access the outdoors in an equitable manner, and that is for all people, right? And ADA accessibility is a large part of that. Of course, there's other ways to make a property accessible as well. But I know with the OSWA program, it's generally just focused on actually acquiring the land. And then the best option specifically for ADA accessibility is through our rec trails program. You're absolutely right, Amy. There's a strong focus on ADA in the rec trails grant program, which as we said earlier, has been funded. So that's very great news. Coming off of this latest bond session, strong support from the governor for our rec trails program. So really exciting news there. So that's probably your best option if you're looking specifically at ADA. I know some of the other things that we had talked about were just like looking at installing parking and signage and things of that nature, which is very important when it comes to public access. So I know some of those things aren't always covered, but as we look at the scoring sheet, some of those we had talked a little bit earlier about, how do we make sure these priority projects get funded, and some of those projects that really are going to catch our interest are the ones that do have a strong focus on climate change, the GC3, as the commissioner mentioned, and then also the public access component is really important. And so that there's many different pieces of that. ADA, just the ability to park, signage, trail signage, maps, things of that nature. And so we tried to change the application to try to highlight some of those, and you'll see that reflected in the scoring sheet as well. So thank you. That's a great question.
Yeah, thank you. And actually, where was it? Oh, and just because we're talking about the scoring sheet, and not specifically as to it, but the question came in from Christopher here at the very end. Just as more land trusts are exploring the potential advantages of working together in larger regional collaborations, if not outright merging, is there consideration within DEEP of favoring grant applications that include collaborations or larger geographic impacts and otherwise generally promoting more regional strategies? So that does go to the scoring sheet, at least somewhat indirectly there, but it really would be relevant.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. Yeah, so looking at regional strategies, I think one of the things that we are looking at as we review the scoring sheet are making sure that grants, grant applications from cities or closer to cities would have the chance to score just as well as grants from more rural areas, and trying to make sure there's an equity balance there. Obviously, looking at the GC3 reports, we see the importance of heat island effect on local communities for urban forestry, and making sure there's green space and tree canopy in cities is incredibly important. And then looking at the rural areas, there's opportunities to really protect and preserve some of those larger core forests. I think your question is a little bit more focused on like regionalization. I think what we're focused on this grant program is making sure that as we look at our dollars and how they get distributed, making sure that they get distributed in an equitable manner so that the cities benefit just as much as the rural communities. And certainly there's a benefit to cities when rural communities preserve space, as well as to the rural communities when cities preserve space. So I think there's a lot of cross benefit there as well. But we want to make sure that our grants are being scored in an equitable manner as we look kind of across the landscape in Connecticut.
So thank you, Mason. And I'm looking at the clock. We have 5 minutes left. And I did receive directly to me a question to pose. And it really goes to exactly what you're talking about. But it would be good for people to hear from you as to, why in this new grant round was there a limitation of one application per land trust, as opposed to, like, as in the past, multiple, one land trust could submit multiple applications for different properties.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I could take that one. That's a great question. We were looking when we looked at the application, we wanted to make sure that grants were distributed equitably across the geographic region of the state, which I just explained. But then also we wanted to make sure that grants were finished in a timely manner. And so limiting the number of applications per organization, I think, gives a little bit more focus to making sure that project is completed before moving on to the next application. And I think that's something that we were really, one of the things that we're really trying to do is that long term and big picture is, the faster we can complete projects, and when I say we, it's the collectively, right? So the faster we can complete projects, the more projects we can fund. And when we drag those projects out, that kind of like ties up that money for a period of time. And over the long term, we actually complete less projects. So I think even though this may be a little bit counterintuitive, thinking like, we complete more projects, if we could apply for more applications, I think in the long term, this will help us preserve more land across the state and hit our land conservation bill faster, which is what we're trying to do. And also, I think it's not overly limiting. We know that municipalities can apply for grants. We know nonprofits can apply for grants. So certainly, if an organization has an opportunity to preserve some land, there may be opportunities for the municipality, or the municipality could ask the nonprofit to try to find a way to do that without to kind of make sure that land is still included in the application.
Thank you, Mason, for that. I hope the person who sent that to me is here and listening, because it was an underscored kind of question. So I appreciate you taking that on. So we have just 3 minutes left. And so I'm going to leave it to you, Commissioner. Do you want to say anything by way of some parting comments to this group, or would you rather me just pose another question?
Well, I just want to say that, first off, I'm really grateful that we were able to have this conversation as we could have never anticipated in March of 2020 that we would still be operating in a virtual environment today. But so I really cherish these opportunities to have this kind of discussion and hear from folks some of the questions that are on your mind. And so all the ones that we got today from folks are really great questions, and are going to give us some more things to think about. I also want to say that, we have the land trust community in Connecticut is one of the strongest in the nation. And I think, Amy, you were the one that shared with me that statistic that we are ranked third in the number of land trusts that are active in our state among all the other 50 states. And that's really remarkable. It's not a small commitment of time that people make when they volunteer to get involved in a conservation project. And so, I know that when we're talking with folks who are working in this community, that we're talking to individuals who have a profound commitment to helping to achieve land conservation and environmental protection goals. And for that reason, sometimes we're guilty of just kind of talking to our different advocate groups and different partners in silos about like the specific program. We implement a lot of policies and programs at DEEP, and we can kind of tend to just talk to people about, just OSWA and land, our grant programs, without having the broader conversations around things like lowering transportation emissions and promoting, bike paths and walking trails and livable communities and other things like that. So I was really just glad to have this opportunity today to not only get into, hear this feedback and great questions about ways that we can strengthen our conservation programs, but also about opportunities that we have to work together to channel that incredible commitment and passion that people have for land conservation, to get involved in some of our really high impact climate change policies that are really, we're at a pivotal moment on programs like TCI right now. What happens in the next couple of weeks could really make or break whether we will be the charter members of a program that's going to dramatically transform clean transportation up and down the Northeast, or whether we're going to miss a significant opportunity to make a dent in planet warming emissions from the transportation sector. And so I'm really glad that we were able to talk about that and to, because I know people get involved in this work because they care deeply about topics like climate change, which can feel global in scale, but we see the troubling, impacts of climate change playing out in our local communities, in those special places that, we visit all the time. We see those changes that are happening slowly but inexorably. And so it's really great to share with people opportunities to get involved in ways that you can make a difference. So I'm just thrilled that we were able to have this time together, and great questions. We're going to take a lot of these back. And I want to thank you, Amy, and others on this call for all the work you're doing and for being such incredible partners and making such a great difference in our state.
Well, thank you so much for this. You know, as you were talking, I was just thinking about how many opportunities you, Commissioner, and your staff have offered all of us to get involved, to speak up, to participate, to have these direct Q&A sessions. It really is, in my experience, been unprecedented. And so I want to thank you for that, because that accessibility is really key to making sure that we are reaching out and thinking beyond our, you know, our very special localized interests and thinking more holistically about what's going to make a difference for the state. So thank you for these opportunities, and we're always welcome to host you and deep and have these conversations. So thanks to all. And I know Rebecca just put in the chat a reminder that next week we are meeting once again with deep staff to have an info session on the Open Space and Watershed Land Acquisition Grant Program, as well as the Urban Green and Community Garden Program. Those applications, of course, you know, are due September 30th. This is a great opportunity to ask your questions directly of deep staff about your projects and just learn more about the program. So that information is available on our website as well. So thanks, everybody. Have a really great day. Get outside, and thanks for all you do. We're grateful.